Seth and I are going to be showing you a two-player game of Incantris. After the thumping that Seth gave me in the last game, I challenged him to a rematch, so here we go. We've changed things up a little bit. We've changed teams. Seth is going to be playing the blue wizard team, and I'm going to be playing the red wizard team. Again, though, we are going to be playing the shifting arena scenario, which means that the game board, the arena there, is going to be changing as we go through the game. Once again, in order to see who goes first, we roll all of the casting dice, looking for as many wands as we can roll. Seth rolls more wands, so he will be taking the first turn. Seth chooses to activate his Sorcerer and cast the spell Power Circle. This is a spell that supercharges any spells that are cast by a wizard who is standing in the Power Circle. Then Seth moves the Sorcerer. Now it's my turn, and I choose to activate my Sorceress. She moves, and now will cast the spell Guardian Hydra. The Guardian Hydra magically erupts into the arena and will be ready to make its attack in future turns. Now it's Seth's turn, and he activates his Shadow Weaver. Seth moves his Shadow Weaver and then chooses to cast one of his favorite spells, Fog Wall. This magical astral fog appears in 2 hexes. My wizards will not be able to move through these hexes or see through them for the purposes of spell casting. However, Seth's wizards can. Very interesting spell. On my turn, I activate my Shaman and choose to move him into a position that I think will be advantageous in future turns. Seth's turn, and he activates his Arcane Knight and likewise moves her to an advantageous position. My turn, and I activate my Druid, again trying to position her for advantage when the board shifts at the end of this round. It is now the end of round 1. Because the Arcane Knight was positioned on a hex that was made up of 2 separate tiles, Seth may choose to which full hex he would like the Arcane Knight to move to, and so moves her to the tile that will be moving. The tile now shifts. And we flip over our wizard turn tokens to prepare for another round of action. It's Seth's turn now, and he chooses to activate his Shadow Weaver, and he casts Gloom Strike against my Sorceress. Because he is standing on the casting circle, he gets to add an additional wand to his casting roll. Seth rolls a total of 3 wands. I am only able to ward 1, and so the Sorceress sustains 2 life points of damage. I use the slider to indicate that on her wizard reference board. Seth then moves his Shadow Weaver to a new position. This is a very interesting move that Seth makes. Why did he move the Shadow Weaver to the new position? If he had not, my Shaman would be able to move around the Arcane Knight and cast Eagle Talon, his most powerful spell, against Seth's Sorcerer, while also standing on the Power Circle. This is an incredibly powerful spell. But by moving the Shadow Weaver to the position that he did, Seth ensures that if I choose to make that move with my Shaman, I will have to move by the Arcane Knight, thereby triggering her Retribution special ability as he tries to move past her to engage the Sorcerer. It's now my turn, and I have some very interesting choices to make. By far, the most powerful move that I have to make is to try to move my Shaman towards Seth's Sorcerer, and by standing on the Power Circle, be able to potentially deal a lot of damage to the Sorcerer. But in order to do this, I would be subject to the Arcane Knight's Retribution special ability. Remember that I have not activated any of my wizards yet on this round, so I am free to activate any one of them that I would like on this turn. A more defensive move would be for me to activate my Druid and have her cast Breath of Life on my Sorceress to try to restore some of the life points that she'd lost. I could also use her in a more offensive manner to try to get her to the Power Circle. I also seem to have my Sorceress in a pretty good position to cast against the Arcane Knight. Remember that the Arcane Knight is most vulnerable to my Sorceress's elemental magic, and I do have the Guardian Hydra not far from Seth's Arcane Knight. So I could have the Guardian Hydra cast its magic against the Arcane Knight, and then also cast with my Sorceress against the Arcane Knight. So I have some very interesting choices here on this turn. Ultimately, I choose to go with the most aggressive move that I can. I'm going to try to move my Shaman to cast against Seth's Sorcerer, but in doing so, I'm going to trigger his Arcane Knight's Retribution ability. Moving adjacent to the Arcane Knight does not trigger her Retribution ability, but moving out of any hex that is adjacent to her does. So when I move to the second hex, it triggers Retribution. Retribution allows Seth to roll 2d plus 1 against the Shaman. Seth rolls 2 wands, but I am able to ward them. Then once again, when the Shaman moves forward again, Retribution is once again triggered. Seth rolls 3 wands for the Arcane Knight. I ward, and the Shaman loses 1 life point. It seems like it was a good move to try to run that gauntlet. The Shaman is now adjacent to Seth's Sorcerer, and now casts Eagle Talon for a 3d plus 3 spell. In total, I roll 5 wands against the Sorcerer. Seth wards against one of the wands, and the Sorcerer loses 4 life points. It's now Seth's turn, and he chooses to activate his Arcane Knight. The Arcane Knight charges toward my Sorceress and casts Spectral Rush. It is a 2d plus 3 spell, and here Seth fails to roll any wands, therefore it's 3 wands against my Sorceress. This was a dangerous situation for my Sorceress, but she's able to ward enough to remain alive. It's now my turn, and in an attempt to finish off Seth's Sorcerer, I activate my Druid and move the Druid into the power circle to cast Tempest against the Sorcerer. This makes it a 2d plus 3 spell for a total of 4 wands against the Sorcerer. The Sorcerer isn't going to be able to ward enough to counter that anyway, and is slain. This is also a critical strategic move, because Seth had not been able to activate the Sorcerer yet on this round, and now the Sorcerer is slain. So now it's Seth's turn, but he has no wizards left to activate this round. Both the Shadow Weaver and the Arcane Knight have already been activated, and the Sorcerer is slain. So Seth basically forfeits his turn, and then it returns to my turn, and I get to activate my Sorceress. She is critically low on life points, and she is facing down the Arcane Knight, and she is most vulnerable against the Arcane Knight's spiritual magic. But the first thing the Sorceress is going to do is use her Guardian Hydra. The Hydra is going to cast its magic against the Arcane Knight. The Hydra rolls 3 wands against the Arcane Knight, and the Arcane Knight loses the life points. But it's not enough to slay the Arcane Knight and get my Sorceress out of her very bad position. And my Sorceress can't just move away from the Arcane Knight without triggering her Retribution special ability. My Sorceress is most vulnerable to the Arcane Knight's spiritual magic anyway, and so if she does that, she may very well die this turn. Fortunately, my Sorceress knows the spell Teleport. If she casts this spell, she could even move herself 4 spaces away, and teleporting away from a hex adjacent to an Arcane Knight does not trigger her Retribution special ability. So in an attempt to save her life, the Sorceress is going to cast Teleport and then move to try to get away from the Arcane Knight. She casts Teleport and then magically appears 4 hexes away, and then makes her move. Of course, it will be Seth's turn next, and he will get to activate whichever one of his wizards he would like to activate. But I need to get the Sorceress far enough away from the Arcane Knight that the Arcane Knight will not be able to cast spells against her. There's also the Shadow Weaver out there who has the spell Gloomstrike. But I would much rather my Sorceress take her chances against the Shadow Weaver's Gloomstrike than try to face down the Arcane Knight. It is now the end of the round, and the arena shifts, and this is good for me because it means that the Arcane Knight is going to be moving away from my Sorceress. Also, all the turn tokens now reset. It's now Seth's turn, and he chooses to activate his Shadow Weaver. Of course, he's going to try to take down my Sorceress. He moves and then casts Gloomstrike. It is a 2d plus 1 spell, and Seth rolls 3 wands against my Sorceress. That's more than she can ward against and remain alive. Despite her best efforts, she is slain. It's now my turn, and I choose to activate my Shaman. The Shaman is moving up to the Shadow Weaver and will cast Eagle Talon. I roll 4 wands. The Shadow Weaver loses 3 life points. On Seth's turn, he chooses to activate his Arcane Knight and move her into a position that will be advantageous when the board shifts again. My turn, and I activate my druid. I move her around the fog wall so that I can cast Tempest against Seth's Shadow Weaver. I roll 4 wands, and after warding, this moves Seth's Shadow Weaver down to only a single life point remaining. This is the end of another round, and it's time to reset our wizard turn tokens and shift the arena. The Arcane Knight was again on a hex created by 2 different tiles, and so Seth moves the Arcane Knight to the central tile before the other tile shifts. It's Seth's turn, and he activates his Shadow Weaver, and he retreats close to the Arcane Knight. He chooses to cast Bane on my Shaman. This is a spell that, if it takes effect on the Shaman, will reduce the Shaman's warding rolls against all power sources to only 1d. Seth rolls only 1 wand on the casting dice, but I fail to ward at all, and so the spell takes effect on the Shaman. The Shadow Weaver's special ability is Shadow Dance, and this allows him to split his movement before and after spell casting, and so Seth continues movement with the Shadow Weaver. It's now my turn, and I choose to activate my Shaman and send him after Seth's Shadow Weaver. I cast Eagle Talon against the Shadow Weaver, a 3d+2 spell, but am only able to roll 2 wands against the Shadow Weaver. Fortunately, after Seth's warding roll, that is just enough to remove the Shadow Weaver from the game. Seth's turn, and he activates his Arcane Knight. Her most powerful spell, and indeed one of the most powerful spells in the game, is Spectral Rush, and so she moves to employ it against my druid. Fortunately, my druid still has all of her life points remaining. Seth rolls 4 wands with his casting dice. I ward against 1, and the druid loses 3 life points. It's now my turn, and I activate my druid, but she can't back out and away from the Arcane Knight without triggering Retribution against her, so instead she chooses to cast Breath of Life on herself. She restores 3 of her life points. Since Spectral Rush is her most effective spell, but it can only be used if she begins her turn at least 3 hexes from her target, she has no choice, if she's going to cast that spell, to go over and try to cast it against my Shaman. She rolls 3 wands against my Shaman. I roll 1 ward, and she inflicts 2 points of damage on the Shaman. On my turn, I choose to activate the Shaman and cast Eagle Talon against the Arcane Knight. I roll 4 wands. The Arcane Knight sustains 2 life points of damage. I activate my druid and cast Tempest against Seth's Arcane Knight. I roll 3 wands. The Arcane Knight wards 1, drops 2 more life points, and is now only at 1 life point remaining. The arena now shifts. It's Seth's turn, and again, so that the Arcane Knight can use her most powerful spell, Spectral Rush, she goes over to use it against the druid. It is a 2d+3 spell, and she rolls 3 wands. The druid loses 3 of her life points. On my turn, I activate my Shaman in an attempt to drop the Arcane Knight, and cast Eagle Talon, rolling 3d+2 against the Arcane Knight. I roll 4 wands, which is more than she is able to ward against and remain alive. She is removed from the game, and my team takes victory. Total playtime for this game was almost exactly 27 minutes.
Incantris is available on ravenkeep.net. Shop now and get it for your table today.